Nicholas Rossi update! It was a total show as the notorious conman and essayer made his first appearance in American court today. And if you were wondering if he's still sticking with that fake Arthur Knight persona...
Objection, my lady. That is complete essay.
Oh yeah, that is the stuff! Today's appearance happened via Zoom, and it combined all the worst elements of the criminal arraignment of a crazy person and your office's weekly staff meeting. Right off the bat, nobody could understand what Rossi was saying because of the fan-favorite oxygen mask which he's brought back for the American remake, combined with his distance from the camera and the stunted fake British accent he insists on using. When asked for his name and date of birth, Rossi insisted again that he was Arthur Knight and gave a fake birthday, claiming the 22nd of the 11th, which is not actually what people in England call November, but you sell that fake accent as best you can, Nick. The 22nd of the 11th is also Scarlett Johansson's birthday, by the way, because if you're gonna pick a fake birthday, that's not a bad twinsy to have. This caused confusion in the court, though, as the judge, seemingly the only person on earth who hasn't heard of this saga, thought they had the wrong person, until the prosecutor, Tamara Vasquez, informed her he's lying, which prompted Rossi to say, "Objection, milady, that is complete hearsay, your ladyship," before mumbling something about how he shouldn't have been extradited because he has an appeal pending in the UK Supreme Court, and I guess because they haven't officially told him to go F himself yet, it's still up in the air. I also love milady and your ladyship. Like, that's how he thinks that we think that English people talk. Anyway, the judge pretty quickly cottoned on to what kind of character she was dealing with, and things got down to swift business after that, informing Rossi that he'd be getting a public defender, and his next hearing would be in 9 days, and he could forget about bail, and ordering Rossi not to have any contact with the victim. Rossi insisted he already has a lawyer, Lance Bastian, and the judge told him, yeah, he's welcome to show up too, before saying we're done and moving on to the next case. And it looks like we only need to wait a week until the next court hearing, and that's if Rossi doesn't do anything crazy in the time before then. But the second this guy so much as farts, you know I'm gonna bring it to you. Stay tuned. Nicholas Rossi update! If you've been following this bizarre case, you know that Rossi, aka Arthur Knight, loves courtroom antics. Well, this week's antics are refusing to show up in court at all. When the judge asked the prison guards what reason Rossi gave for why he couldn't show up, the answer was none. No reason given. But the judge humored him anyway and has pushed the court date back by 2 weeks. But he also said that unless Rossi is sick or has a very good reason for why he can't show up next time, he will authorize the use of reasonable force to compel attendance. And if you're unfamiliar with American courts, they will straight up cart you out like Hannibal Lecter to make you appear before the judge. Not that they need to do that. Remember, Rossi's whole shtick is that he's confined to a wheelchair, so they just need to unlock the wheels and point him towards the webcam. And it would kind of break character if Rossi suddenly stood up and kicked the prison guards away, though I would love to see Jean-Claude Van Scam here try it. But Rossi is in for a rude awakening if he thinks they'll put up with this for very long. Remember, in the UK, he wasn't actually charged with a crime. The whole trial was only about if he could be extradited at all. We miss you, Mungo Bovey. But now that he's back in the US, he's facing down a life sentence for a violent crime. And I think the court's tolerance for his BS will be commensurate to that, and why he fought so hard against extradition in the first place. More updates to come. Stay tuned. Nicholas Rossi update! For the second time this week, Rossi was a no-show in court. He's actually being tried in 2 separate districts right now, because even though his crime was against only one person, it occurred in 2 different locations, and so each place wants a crack at him. Earlier in the week, he refused to show up to Utah County's 4th District Court, and today he was supposed to be in Salt Lake County's 3rd District Court, which he did show up to once already, this time for a hearing pertaining to his detention, which I imagine would have have been pretty short because, of course, he's not going to get bail. He already faked his own unaliving once before and fled the country to escape justice. They are not going to let this guy out and about. Now, Rossi is supposed to be represented by defense attorney Lance Bastian, who was on the Zoom call in the 4th District Court hearing that he was a no-show to, but he's not here today, and I'm not sure why. I'm going to find out if he's quit or not. But in the 3rd District Court today, Rossi was represented by public defender Samantha Dugan, and she told the court that apparently he goes by Arthur Knight, so she's going to refer to him as Arthur Knight, and also that he has significant medical issues, and that is why he was not in court today, at least according to the information that she was given by Rossi's other lawyers. Which means she does not know who Rossi is yet or what she's dealing with, but she's gonna find out soon. But it also sounds like Utah might not take the Scottish courts' determination on Rossi's health or identity, which means we're gonna have to go through the rigmarole of establishing once again that this dude is Nicholas Rossi, in which case get ready for him to claim that he's being framed all over again, and another medical examination to prove that the oxygen mask and wheelchair are all BS. The judge agreed to postpone this hearing until March 8th, but Utah prosecutor Tamara Vasquez was quick to jump on that and request an order for reasonable force to be used to make him show up to the next hearing, just like the 3rd District did earlier this week. The public defender Samantha Dugan quickly chimed in that while she doesn't have as much background on Mr. Knight as she would like, she does know that he has serious medical issues and asked that the court not issue the reasonable force order, saying that she will go visit Rossi, talk to him, and figure out why he's a no-show. Prosecutor Vasquez was on it, though, and clapped back that if Rossi didn't have a medical issue, we wouldn't need to compel him to show up at all, because otherwise he's just choosing not to show up, and that would be a whole nother level of no-no in the court's eyes, right? So the judge said, okay, we'll do the reasonable force order, but Samantha Dugan, you can go talk to Arthur Knight, and if she still has strong objections to the reasonable force order, she can file a motion well before the next March 8th hearing. So that's where we are in the 3rd District. Meanwhile, he's due back in court in the 4th District on February 6th. And there is that reasonable force order in place on that one already, so we'll see what he tries to pull to get out of it. But I think we'll see his ass back in court and on camera on that day. Lots more to come, and I will keep bringing you updates every step of the way. Stay tuned. Nicholas Rossi update! They say the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Well, we're in the long part of it right now, and it keeps getting longer because Rossi hasn't paid his lawyers yet. Yes, Rossi was in Salt Lake County's 4th District in front of Judge Pullen, and his attorney, Lance Bastian, asked for a delay because he ain't been paid. Judge Pullen asked for clarity, and Bastian said that it's because Rossi's wife Miranda is supposed to be getting the money to him, but that hasn't happened yet because she's in the UK and there's communication issues. Bastian told the judge that he ultimately does expect to be retained, but Miranda has a lot on her plate that she's dealing with right now under the circumstances. They are working on it. It's an active process, but it has just taken some time. The judge asked Rossi how much more time they would need, and Rossi was completely unintelligible. I've gotten good at understanding Rossi through the oxygen mask and the fake accent and the stunted speech, and even I'm like, I got no idea what he's saying right now. But they eventually worked out that he wanted another month to pay. Prosecutor Stephen Jones grew extremely frustrated at this and told the court they've been waiting years to start this trial and asked the court to just appoint a public defender so they could get the show on the road. The judge ruled that Rossi should have the opportunity to be represented by the lawyer of his choice and gave a final extension of 4 weeks, which then became 6 weeks because Bastian wasn't available on April 2nd and Judge Pullen wasn't available on the 9th, so they agreed on April 16th as the next hearing date. Meanwhile, Rossi is due back in Utah's 3rd District on Friday, March 8th in front of Judge Lawrence, and we'll see if something similar happens there or if that judge just presses forward with a public defender. And of course, I will bring you every update as soon as they happen. Stay tuned. Nicholas Rossi update! And this may be the weirdest day in court yet. Rossi was back before Judge Lawrence in Salt Lake County's 3rd District, and it started out as a fairly standard hearing when public defender Samantha Dugan asked for a continuance until April 19th to continue discussions with her client. Tamara Vasquez from the prosecutor's office said okay, but we want to schedule the preliminary hearings and trial then. The judge agreed and told Rossi, hey, we'll see you back here in April, but we're kicking things off then. You got that? And that's when Rossi pulled a Milton from Office Space and was like, Your Honor, if I may, I do have a question. Because his weird fake British accent has now morphed into this laryngitis thing. And his lawyer, Samantha Dugan, jumped in and said, Arthur, I would really prefer it if you talk to me first before we start asking the judge questions. And Rossi ignored her and mumbled to the judge a lot. And after way too long of not being able to understand him, the judge was like, look, we ain't got time for this, so why don't you go to the side and talk to your lawyer, and then she'll tell me what you want. And Rossi ignored the judge and mumble-gasped, all I'm asking is, and then it was just a string of gibberish again. And Samantha Dugan jumped in with, no, we're doing the private call now. Arthur, we're doing the private call now, okay? And they took a 10-minute break and came back, and Samantha Dugan explained to Judge Lawrence that Arthur is frustrated because Utah County Jail keeps calling him Nicholas Rossi and not Arthur Knight, and could the court please order the Utah Jail to call him Arthur Knight from now on. And Judge Lawrence considered this and said, look, all the paperwork here is charging you as Nicholas Rossi. Arthur Knight is your AKA. So when I call the case, I have to call it the Rossi case. But if you want to be called Mr. Knight in this courtroom, sure, I'll call you Mr. Knight. But I'm not going to order the jail the next county over to do that. Maybe Judge Pullen in Utah County might do that for you, but I'm not going to do that for you. We clear? Okay, bye. And with that, they hung up on Rossi. He's next due before Judge Pullen in Utah County's 4th District on the 16th of April, and Judge Lawrence here again in Salt Lake County's 3rd District on April 19th. And that will be the final status conference and the final time that Rossi, or Arthur Knight, as the court will politely call him from now on, will appear by Zoom. All the hearings after that, he's going to be here in person, and we're going to see jury selection and the trial, and hopefully get to a verdict before summer. But first, they need to figure out the competing schedules of this trial and his second trial over in Utah County. And of course, I will be with you every step of the way. Stay tuned. So this is about Nicholas Rossi being represented by a public defender, Samantha Dugan, in court. And the question is, what happened to his attorney, Lance Bastian? Did he get fired or did he quit because they couldn't pay him? And the answer is no. Lance Bastian is still in the mix for the time being anyway. You got to remember that Rossi committed 2 different crimes against 2 different victims in 2 different jurisdictions. So in Salt Lake County's 3rd District Court, Rossi is being represented by a public defender, Samantha Dugan. But over in Utah County's 4th District Court, he is being represented by Lance Bastian. However, Rossi hasn't paid Bastian yet, and they are trying to work that out, which is why the court gave Rossi until April 16th to try to figure out the financials. Otherwise, they're going to do what the prosecutor asked and just assign a public defender to represent Rossi over in Utah County's 4th District. So that's why we keep jumping between 2 different courts and 2 different judges and 2 different attorneys, because Rossi is being tried for 2 different crimes against 2 different victims in 2 different jurisdictions. So that is what is happening with Rossi and his lawyers right now. Hope that clears things up. Nicholas Rossi mini update, because I didn't say that in the last video and you guys got upset with me. This is in response to the question of how much does Rossi owe Lance Bastian? And the answer is probably a lot. The average going rate for a criminal defense attorney in Utah is $300 per hour. And the minimum required to defend a sexual assault case like this is about 150 hours, and it could go to several hundred hours. So just bare minimum, we're looking at about $45,000 for Bastian to defend Nicholas Rossi. Now, just to get the ball rolling, Rossi will need to have paid Bastian a retainer, and that could be a few $1,000s or $10,000 or $20,000. I'm not sure. But assuming that Bastian does get paid for the entire duration and sticks it out all the way through the verdict, I'm thinking he's going to have to pay Lance Bastian anywhere from 50 to 100 grand over the course of this trial. Nicholas Rossi update! Rossi was back in court twice last week, Tuesday with Judge Pullen in Utah County's 4th District, and Friday with Judge Lawrence in Salt Lake County's 3rd District. When last we left things with Judge Pullen, Rossi had not yet paid his attorney Lance Bastian, and was given a 1-month extension to come up with the money. Well, 1 month was up, and Rossi still hasn't paid. So Lance Bastian chose not to come to the hearing because he ain't working for free. Rossi told the judge it was not surprising he was a no-show, but said, "I am still working with my wife to ensure he is paid what we agreed." Rossi continues to insist that the reason he hasn't been able to pay is because he didn't know he would be extradited, so he was not able to make arrangements earlier. "Because I was not told of the extradition date and I had appeals pending, I did not have the ability to know Mr. Bastian would need to be paid in short order, because one cannot be extradited from the United Kingdom until those appeals are heard and ruled on." Yeah, that's 1,000,000% bullshit, by the way. He got rejected by the Scottish Appeals Court, and his only remaining appeal was to the UK Supreme Court, who aren't going to take up the case, let alone overturn it. He was legally extradited no matter what he claims. Also, that was back in January, and if you haven't gotten the money together by now, you ain't getting it together. Rossi then asked if he could make 4 verbal motions, and the judge said no. This court has limited time today, and you should really be doing this with a lawyer, so I'm going to give you 1 more month to arrange payment. I know. And that's when Prosecutor McKay Lewis was like, "Your Honor, we object to another extension. Can we not just give this guy a public defender and get this show on the road?" We are all McKay Lewis right now. And the judge said Rossi should get to have the lawyer of his choice, which is what he said last month. But then he told Rossi, "You've had ample time now. So if you haven't retained an attorney by the next hearing, it'll be public defender o'clock." Things were a lot more to the point over in Salt Lake County's 3rd District, where Judge Lawrence isn't taking a Sunday stroll with this. He scheduled June 12th for the first preliminary hearing, where he will determine if there is enough evidence for Rossi to stand trial. He'll also consider whether Rossi should remain incarcerated for that case, or if he can be granted bail. But look, this guy is a crazy flight risk. Ain't no way that's happening unless they want him to disappear again. Rossi said he wants to have Lance Bastian represent him in that case as well, instead of current public defender Samantha Dugan. Rossi said, "Well, we do have the notion, the reality, that Mr. Lance Bastian will be taking over for Miss Dugan. My wife and I are working relentlessly to ensure that is done." Yeah, I ain't holding my breath. Rossi's next court appearance will be with Judge Pullen in Utah County's 4th District on May 14th, and he will be appearing in court in person that day, so that should be a fun little train wreck to watch. Meanwhile, his next appearance in Salt Lake County's 3rd District with Judge Lawrence will be June 12th, so it should be a pretty active summer for him. And rest assured, I will be bringing you every single update along the way. Stay tuned. Nicholas Rossi update! As last we left things in Utah County's 4th District, Rossi's lawyer of choice, Lance Bastian, bounced due to Rossi not paying him. And Judge Pullen gave Rossi 1 more month to find an attorney before he appointed a public defender. Well, time is up, and Rossi has announced his new legal counsel, Arthur Knight. Wait, what? Yes, Nicholas Rossi, aka Arthur Knight, is going to represent himself in court, which is wonderful news for anyone who wanted to see him spend the rest of his life in prison. Because remember, first-degree felonies in Utah, like the RAPE that Rossi is accused of, carry a mandatory minimum of 5 years in prison and a maximum of life behind bars. Judge Pullen straight up told Rossi, "You will be at a distinct disadvantage representing yourself. Conviction is likely under those circumstances, and imprisonment is mandatory. Understanding those realities of representing yourself, is that still your desire, or would you like the appointment of a public defender?" Rossi said, "That is what I desire, Your Honor." Again, you realize that if you choose to represent yourself as a judge, I can't help you in any way. You try your case on your own without assistance. Do you understand that? Yes, I am aware of all of this. So is that still what you want to do? It's not ideal, but it is what is necessary. It's not what's necessary. All you need to do is ask for a lawyer today, and I can appoint one to represent you. Have you even ever studied law? Yes, in both England and Wales. Judge Pullen was understandably skeptical and asked Rossi, "At what university did you study?" And Rossi thought about it for a long-ass time before finally answering, "About a year at Bristol University in England." The judge said, "Remember, you're under oath. Is that true?" "Yes, Your Honor." It is absolutely not true, and it would be very easy to prove by calling up Bristol University in England, but the Utah courts are not going to throw a perjury charge at Rossi on top of all of this. Now, in Rossi's defense, he did try defending himself in court once before. That was in front of the Scottish Supreme Court, challenging his extradition, and it did not go well for him. The full recap is part 30 in my Arthur Knight playlist if you want to see how bad it was. When Judge Pullen cautioned again that Rossi faced spending the rest of his life in prison, Rossi said, "That's a chance I am willing to take, Your Honor. My identity and life and that of my family have been completely destroyed and decimated by bad actors. I feel I would be best to do that, not only because I have been living this horror for the past 2 years, but also because I want to get out of jail." Mr. Rossi, I must advise you that in my view, you would be far better defended by a trained lawyer than you can be by yourself. It is unwise for you to represent yourself, and I would strongly urge you not to represent yourself. Do you understand that? "I do, Your Honor." Rossi did say he's going to spend some time in the prison library brushing up on the ins and outs of Utah case law, so, I'm sure he's going to crush it. The next hearing in this case is June 11. Stay tuned. Nicholas Rossi update! Rossi, aka Nicholas Oliverdian, aka Arthur Knight, was back in Judge Lawrence's Salt Lake County courtroom this week for a status conference hearing, and the status is, someone has screwed up Royal and we can't proceed, because neither the prosecutors nor the defense attorneys have received the extradition papers from Scotland yet. And you're like, why do we need those anymore? He's in Utah now. Well, apparently they've got to make sure that everything was done above board and that all the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed because of civil rights or something like that. I don't know how it works, but that's how it works. But dude, Scotland, we know you guys are busy watching your team at the Euro 2024 soccer tournament, but come on, just email the PDF over. It'll take 20 seconds and we can get this show on the road and lock Rossi away for life. But instead, Judge Lawrence has now punted the preliminary hearings until August 22nd, which is when they'll determine if there's enough evidence to proceed to trial and whatnot. Although there will be a status conference hearing on July 12th to see if we're still on track for that date or if we need to punt again. But don't fret, because because Rossi is due back in Judge Pullen's Utah County Court this week, where he will be defending himself without a lawyer, so hopefully that one's gonna move on a little bit faster. Unfortunately, it looks like news coverage on Rossi is beginning to wane. In fact, I seem to be the only one who's staying on top of it. But don't worry, because I'm going to start ordering the official Utah County Court transcripts to bring you every moment of the trial. Otherwise, I will be back with more Rossi updates as soon as they happen. Stay tuned. Nicholas Rossi update! Rossi defended himself in Judge Pullen's Utah County Court this week, and it turns out he's actually a really good lawyer because his very first motion was to agree to use a public defender. Yeah, I know it's disappointing. We were all expecting an all-time epic laugh fest as he tried to defend himself, but don't worry, I'm sure the dumpster fire will still happen with this guy. But if you remember your American cop shows, when they read you your rights, they say you have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. And the if you cannot afford an attorney part is important, because you need to prove that to the court. And Rossi testified that he has no income, which is very true. He doesn't have property, now his wife Miranda does, but that's in another country, and that he only has about $1,400 in his bank accounts. Now that last part is very false, because Rossi is a con man who we know has scammed close to $500,000 out of people over the years, and he never pays for anything himself. So that money is squirreled away somewhere. You might say, well, Miranda has it, obviously, but she's as bent as he is, and I'd say there is no way he trusts her with his life savings, or more accurately, life stealings. But the court believed he was broke enough to appoint a public defender, who said, well, obviously we can't start today, we need to familiarize ourselves with everything. So the preliminary hearing that was scheduled for Friday is now bumped until next week, June 25th. And if you think this is another Rossi scam to delay and buy time, you're probably right. And I expect him to fire multiple public defenders to keep slowing this process down, just like he did in Scotland. But remember, he's stuck in a Utah jail cell this whole time, so it's not like he's walking out and about or rolling around in his fake wheelchair, more accurately. All he's doing is delaying the inevitable. But that's where we're at. 2 public defenders for his 2 different grape trials. June 25th, we're back with Judge Pullen. July 12th, we're back with Judge Lawrence. And Rossi is back in jail until then. And fingers crossed, he will never breathe fresh air again. Stay tuned. Nicholas Rossi update! As last we left Rossi in Judge Pullen's Utah County courtroom, Rossi thought twice about defending himself in court and agreed to have a public defender assigned. And we now know who that public defender is, Mrs. Shawn Howell. No idea if Howell will be representing Rossi for the duration of the trial, or if Rossi will try to delay things by firing her halfway through. All I know is that Howell has very big shoes to fill. We miss you, Mungo! Assigning the new attorney was pretty much the substance of this status conference, though, and our next hearing in front of Judge Pullen will be on July 23rd. Meanwhile, over in Judge Lawrence's Salt Lake County courtroom, it was another continuance, which is legal speak for, is everybody ready? No? Alright, let's postpone again, which isn't a big deal because they're still exchanging evidence and doing discovery. They'll meet again now on July 26th to see if they're still on track for the big preliminary hearing scheduled for August 22nd. That is going to be the big update, where the prosecution presents all the evidence to the judge along with witness testimony to get the judge to certify the case to proceed to trial. But I'm thinking that preliminary hearing might have to get delayed as well, especially if Rossi tries to pull any antics that gum up the works. All in all, this is a minor update week because we are still in the status conference part of the proceedings, but don't worry, big updates are coming soon, especially when we get into the actual criminal trial part of the process. And of course, I will be bringing you all the updates as soon as they happened. Stay tuned. Nicholas Rossi update! Nicholas Rossi, aka Arthur Knight, was back in court twice this week, first with Judge Pullen in Utah County, and then Judge Lawrence in Salt Lake County. With Judge Pullen, this was a status conference to see if they were still on track to have preliminary hearings. And the answer is big time, because Rossi's new public defender, Sean Howell, asked for a special set preliminary hearing, which basically asked the judge to hold all his calls, cancel all his other appointments, let's just bang out this Rossi thing in one single day. The prosecution will now have that day to show that they have enough evidence and witness testimony to establish probable cause that the crime of R has occurred and that it was Rossi who perpetrated it. Only the prosecution will get to present evidence on that day, and the court will have to take everything in the light most favorable to the state. That special set hearing is now scheduled for August 20th, and if the prosecution is successful, they will move on to trial shortly after that. That is the way the legal system works here. You and I are both learning a lot. Over in Judge Lawrence's court, it was supposed to be a status conference confirming the special set preliminary hearing for August 22nd. But then things got a little weird when the prosecution in that case told Rossi's public defender, Samantha Dugan, hey, we have to share all the evidence with you, but please don't share all the evidence with Rossi himself because it might jeopardize ongoing investigations in other states and other countries. Because remember, Rossi has been accused of fraud and SA in Ohio, Colorado, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Utah, and England. And there's probably even more than that we don't know about yet. Public defender Samantha Dugan objected and said, hey, my job is to defend this guy, and now you're telling me I gotta do it with one hand behind my back, and if I violate that, I could be sanctioned? And even Judge Lawrence was a little skeptical and asked the prosecution, hey, show me in the rule book where it says you can keep evidence from the defendant. And the prosecution countered with, hey, state law says we should share information. Nowhere does it say must share information. And look, Rossi is a sack of crap and absolutely did all the things he's been accused of, and I get where the prosecution is coming from. But Rossi also deserves a fair trial, if for no other reason than we don't want him getting off on a technicality. So, Judge Lawrence has scheduled another hearing behind closed doors for next week for both sides to hash the details out. But we are definitely moving very quickly in both cases right now, and we should be moving on to the actual criminal trials very soon. And of course, I will be bringing it all to you as soon as it happens. Stay tuned. Nicholas Rossi update! A lot of people have asked, hey man, didn't Rossi commit crimes while he was in the UK? Like, he R-ed a woman within a week of landing, right? What's happening there? Well, I have an answer for you. If you need a refresher, as Rossi was fleeing the US back in 2017, he joined a dating app to connect with women in the UK, and one unfortunate single mom in Essex, England matched with him. Rossi did the full press con man thing, and within 2 weeks, he showed up at her door with a suitcase and announced he was moving in, and about a week after that, he R'd her. And that's when she had the locks changed while he was out and told him he could collect his things at the police station. If you want the full details, it is part 23 and 24 in my Arthur Knight playlist, but I warn you, it is disturbing. Well, Essex police have been trying to put a case together ever since the woman came forward back in 2022, once Rossi began to make international headlines. And it was still ongoing at the time of Rossi's extradition back in January. Well, the Essex police have just announced they are abandoning the case and will not be pursuing charges, which sadly is not a surprise. Because never mind the logistical problem that he is back in the US facing trial for 2 separate R's in Utah, either of which will see him spend the rest of his life in prison, but this Essex case was always going to be notoriously hard to prosecute. Because Rossi's relationship with the woman, while abusive and high pressure and under false pretenses, was still consensual at first, up until the point it stopped being consensual. And while I'm not an expert on the British criminal justice system, I believe that all the other stuff we know about Rossi, which until he is convicted remain allegations still, probably can't be used against him yet. And you put those two together, and this was going to be a pretty heavy burden of proof for the British prosecutors. And they ultimately concluded there was no realistic prospect of a conviction. And that sucks! But the courts and the police have limited resources, so better to spend it on a criminal you think you can send to jail than one who you can't, and will probably be going to jail in the USA anyway. The good news, though, is we shouldn't have to wait long for that, because Rossi's trials in Utah are moving forward quickly now, and he's scheduled back in court twice this week. And of course, as always, I will be bringing it all to you. Stay tuned. Nicholas Rossi update! And this one's a biggin'. Rossi was back in Salt Lake County Court for a special set preliminary hearing where Judge Lawrence had to decide if there was enough probable cause to proceed to trial. Rossi was sporting a new look for his big day in court. Shave, haircut, and the O2 mask is gone, replaced by a very demure, very mindful nasal cannula complete with O2 bottle. Either that, or he's trying out a new disguise. Arthur Knight, I don't know who that is, Your Honor. I'm San Francisco. For the most part, Rossi listened to his attorney, Samantha Dugan, and kept his big mouth shut during the proceedings, except for the time that she sneezed and he said, "Bless you." Don't fall for it, lady! The prosecution was up first and called their witness, Detective Derek Coates, who in 2019 was assigned to process the backlog of grape kits the state was sitting on, including the other 2008 R that Rossi is accused of over in Judge Pullen's Utah County Court. DNA from that grape kit in Utah County ID'd Rossi as the culprit there, who was already in the database because of an earlier essay he committed in Ohio that made him register as a sex offender. Flash forward to Rossi popping up as Arthur Knight over in Scotland and getting worldwide media attention, and his victim in Salt Lake County came forward and said, "Hey, police, I know that guy." The Salt Lake County victim, who we only know so far by the initials MS, identified the house where Rossi was living at the time and where the crime occurred. She also corroborated that she knew him by showing the police text messages and also the application for engagement rings for the two of them from the mall. The prosecution then tried to establish Rossi's identity because he keeps claiming to be Arthur Knight. But Rossi's lawyer, Samantha Dugan, said, "Hey, let's not waste the court's time there, and we will just agree that the guy you're talking about is my client for the purposes of this preliminary hearing only." Which means Rossi could still try to pull the "this is just a case of mistaken identity, Your Honor" bullshit later on. Samantha Dugan also confirmed that, unlike the R over in Utah County, there is no DNA evidence linking Rossi to this crime before Judge Lawrence here in Salt Lake County. And that may or may not be important to the jury when that time comes. Both sides rested at that point, and Judge Lawrence ruled that probable cause had successfully been established. The crime most likely did occur, and Rossi is the one who probably did it, so now we can proceed to the arraignment. That's when they tell Rossi what he's been charged with and ask him if he pleads guilty or not guilty. That arraignment is now scheduled for October 17th, and they will also have a bail hearing that morning to determine if Rossi's medical needs are being seen to in the jail he's being held in, or if he will need to be moved to another facility. But you ain't gotta wait till October 17th for another update, because Rossi will be back in court this week for another special set preliminary hearing, this time in front of Judge Pullen in Utah County. And of course, I will be bringing you all the details every step of the way. Stay tuned. Nicholas Rossi update! And today he finally gave up the act. Kind of. We were back in Judge Pullen's courtroom for a bail hearing, and Rossi took the stand to be asked to be let out, and it went off the rails quick. Prosecutors asked, "Hey, if you're not a flight risk, why did you fake your death, flee the country, claim to be an Irish orphan who's never been to the USA, forge fake ID, and keep denying that you are Nicholas Rossi even though DNA evidence clearly proves that you are?" And for the first time ever, Rossi, without the fake accent, said, "Yes, I was Nicholas Rossi, but changed it to Alaverdian to honor my Armenian heritage. And then I changed it to brown, and then Arthur Knight, because my life was being threatened by people in the Rhode Island State House, and that's why I left the country, not because the FBI was investigating me for fraud or that I was wanted for committing R against women, charges which I only just learned about. And the prosecutor said, wait, you're saying you faked your death to hide from these people and keep a low profile? How is going on the news and becoming an international story keeping a low profile? And who are these people threatening you? And Rossi said,
I don't want to give a mouse cheese.
And the prosecutor
What would
said,
giving their names, how would that give a mouse cheese?
Meaning it would stoke the fire.
But Rossi refused to name names in an open courtroom, so Judge Pullen closed the courthouse for a few minutes to get the answers he wanted. And when they came back, Rossi testified that friends of his in the State House, namely Representative Ray Hull, tipped him off to the danger and could substantiate all these claims. Ray Hull, meanwhile, said, who did what to who now? This is the very first I am hearing about this. I got no idea what he's talking about. Rossi pleaded to be let out on bail, saying that his health prevented him from fleeing, claiming that when he was hospitalized with COVID, doctors said he was the illest man in all of Scotland and gave him only a 5% chance to live, something which I give only a 5% chance of being true. Rossi's lawyer, Daniel Diaz, said, hey, people are allowed to change their names, right? Dude's in a wheelchair and using oxygen. How about we set bail at $10,000 so he can go get physical therapy and maybe walk again? Judge Pullen considered that and then considered all of the evidence and said, you are the textbook definition of a flight risk. You've got no ties to Utah. You got a wife in another country sending you money. You've previously faked your death and assumed a false identity, fake accent, and did a 3-year elaborate fight to keep from being extradited from Scotland. And we've got a letter from your alleged victim in this case saying that she worries if you were released, you would either flee the country or harass her, something which you have a history of. And now you come up with this my life is in danger thing? No. I'm ordering you held without bail. The judge then read the charges against Rossi and asked Rossi how he pled to that, guilty or not guilty. And Rossi said, not guilty, Your Honor. Come on, what else were you expecting? Rossi is next back in court tomorrow with Judge Lawrence to go through this exact same thing again for his other Utah R trial, and then he will be back here before Judge Pullen on October 29th. So get ready, because we ought to be picking juries soon, and of course, I will be bringing it all to you. Stay tuned. Nicholas Rossi update! And do I have the scoop for you? Rossi was back before Judge Pullen today, and even though the hearing only lasted 35 seconds, big things come in small packages. At least that's what it says on my Tinder profile. This was supposed to be a status conference to set a trial date, but Rossi's lawyer, Daniel Diaz, that's him in the David S. Pumpkins black and orange getup there, asked for a continuance because he and the state were close to a resolution and wanted more time to work it out. And if you don't speak legalese, that means they're working on a plea bargain agreement right now, which really should come as no surprise. You see, Rossi is looking at 25 years to life if convicted, but crimes like Rossi is accused of are notoriously hard to prosecute, and in Utah, only 3% of those charged ever see the full penalty. So I can see why both sides would be motivated to make a deal. The question is, how low is the prosecution willing to go, and how big a kick in the teeth will it be to his victims? And if Rossi does accept a plea bargain, we have to ask what that means for his other R trial in front of Judge Lawrence, which I personally think is the weaker of the two cases. But we shouldn't have to wait long for an answer, because Rossi will be back before Judge Pullen on November 19th to enter either a plea or to set a trial date. And even before that, he will be back before Judge Lawrence on November 15th for an update in that case. And like always, I will be bringing all the updates to you as soon as they happen. Stay tuned. Nicholas Rossi update, and we have a trial date set. maybe? Rossi was back in court before Judge Lawrence on November 15th, appearing via video link from his jail cell and smartly keeping his big mouth shut while he let public defender Samantha Dugan do all the talking. Dugan told Judge Lawrence that she was also trying to work out a plea deal with prosecutors, but the judge said we should still schedule a trial just in case, and set jury selection for April 21st and a 4-day trial to begin on April 22nd. So this could all be wrapped up in 6 months, or even sooner, because we'll find out tomorrow, November 19th, in Rossi's other trial in front of Judge Pullen, if Rossi's lawyer, Daniel Diaz, was successfully able to work out a plea deal with prosecutors, or if a trial date will need to be set in that case too. And that is the stronger of the two cases against Rossi. And if a plea deal is worked out there in front of Judge Pullen, then Samantha Dugan will use that as the upper guide for what she can ask for in her plea deal with prosecutors in front of Judge Lawrence. And it's not out of the question that Samantha Dugan will ask that the sentences be served concurrently, i.e., every day of jail time for crime A will also count towards crime B at the same time. And if that upsets you, it gets worse, because Rossi sat in a Scottish jail cell for a year and a half while fighting his extradition. And then once he was extradited to Utah, he's been sitting in a jail there for close to a year, which means he's already spent 2.5 years in jail. All that jail time so far will almost certainly count as credit for time served towards any sentence that he winds up getting. So if he's offered a plea deal of, say, 3 years, he's already served 2.5 years towards it, which means he could be walking around a free man just 6 months later. Now, I'm not saying he's only going to get 3 years. I don't know how little or how much jail time Rossi will get, even if they do reach a plea agreement, but we should be finding out very, very soon. And of course, I will be bringing all the updates to you as soon as they happen. Stay tuned. Nicholas Rossi mini update! Now, a lot of you were stunned when I said that if Rossi is convicted and sentenced, that not only will the last year he spent in a Utah jail awaiting trial count as credit for time already served, but that the 1.5 years he was in Scotland fighting extradition would also count. And many of you messaged me to say, how? Well, I'm gonna break it down for you. So obviously, Rossi is not the first person to be living in one jurisdiction but charged with a crime in another jurisdiction and therefore requiring extradition. Now, most of the time this is between 2 US states, but it is frequently international as well, as it was in Rossi's case. Now, the rules for credit for time served in detention vary from state to state, so let's look at Utah's rules specifically. R671-205-2, subsection H, credit for time served is applied, blah, 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 if before being sentenced to prison, the offender was held in custody outside the state based solely on a Utah warrant issued in connection with the sentence. Now, remember, Rossi had not been charged with any crimes while he was in Scotland. He had done crimes in Scotland, but he had not been charged with anything. It wasn't until Utah served Scotland with a warrant for Rossi's arrest that Rossi was arrested and held by Scotland pending the extradition hearing. And yes, he fought the Scottish courts from extraditing him to Utah, but his detention in Scotland was all based on him being a flight risk on that Utah arrest warrant. And again, credit for time served is applied if the offender was held in custody outside the state based solely on a Utah warrant. And if you Google search, do I get time served even if I'm being held in jail in another country fighting extradition? The overwhelming answer from criminal defense attorneys is yes. So that's why whatever jail time Rossi gets, 2.5 years has already been done. But if you have another interpretation, please leave me a comment, because I would love to be wrong on this when it comes to Rossi. Rossi, meanwhile, is back in court today, and I will bring you another Nicholas Rossi update as soon as I have one. Stay tuned. Nicholas Rossi update! The third one this week. I know, I spoil you guys. But we are back in Judge Pullen's court to play Let's Make a Plea Deal! Because Rossi's lawyer, public defender Daniel Diaz, announced that prosecutors have offered them a formal plea deal, which could not be presented to Rossi because he was a no-show for court. Which is weird because this is all done by Zoom from the jail. And Judge Pullen asked Diaz, "Where's your client?" And Diaz said, "I don't know." And the bailiff chimed in with, "Well, we went to go and get Rossi, but he said, nah, that thing's been bumped. I don't have to go." And we're like, if you say so, it's your head, dude. But maybe Rossi has psychic powers because Diaz did ask for a continuance, saying that since he had only just been given the plea bargain offer, he wanted time to present it to Rossi, discuss it, and give Rossi a chance to think it over. Now, we don't know the terms of this plea bargain offer, and Rossi could always refuse it, opting to try his luck with a jury instead, because sadly for the victims, these types of crimes are notoriously hard to get a conviction on. And remember, this case is the stronger of the two against Rossi, so if Rossi does accept the plea bargain here, his lawyer in the other case will ask for even better terms and probably that the sentences be carried out concurrently. And whatever sentence Rossi does get, the last 2.5 years that he's been held in custody will count as credit for time served. But we shouldn't have to wait long to find out because the continuance is only until December 3rd, at which point we will find out if Rossi is taking a plea or taking this all the way to trial. Stay tuned. Nicholas Rossi update! We are back in Judge Pullen's courtroom and Rossi flat out refused to show up to the Zoom call because standing up a judge is always a great idea. Rossi's attorney, Daniel Diaz, said that despite his client being a no-show for court again, he still remained optimistic that Rossi would respond to the plea deal arrangement if given just a couple more weeks. Prosecutor Stephen Jones backed Diaz up by saying that the plea agreement now covers both his trial here in front of Judge Pullen and his one in front of Judge Lawrence. But because it covers multiple counties and multiple charges, it is taking a little extra time to consider given all the moving parts. Judge Pullen said he didn't want to keep punting on this though and urged prosecutors not to make it an open-ended plea offer and instead insist on a deadline for Rossi to accept or refuse. To that end, Judge Pullen scheduled a trial date just in case, starting on September 15th and to last 3 weeks. Remember, Judge Lawrence only scheduled 4 days for Rossi's other trial coming up in April. Both might be moot though if Rossi does wind up accepting this omnibus plea deal, which we still don't know what's in it or not, but we might find out our answer on December 17th, which is when Judge Pullen has ordered everyone back to court for an update. And we'll find out then if Rossi shows up on camera voluntarily or if Judge Pullen feels like having Rossi dragged, kicking and screaming in front of the lens. Stay tuned. Nicholas Rossi update! And this time, he pushed the judge too far. Today was the deadline for Rossi to announce if he was taking the plea deal or not. And the answer was, he was a no-show! That is the 3rd time in a row. Rossi's excuse was that he didn't think he needed to be there for just a scheduling hearing, which is a funny thing to call the deadline to take a plea deal or not. Rossi's attorney, Daniel Diaz, tried to reassure the judge that Rossi was not trying to flex on the court and was still considering the offer. So he asked the judge for another extension, which the prosecution was actually okay with, but Judge Pullen was not. The judge said, "1 more extension." And on that day, he either takes the prosecution's offer and pleads guilty, or the deal is off the table and we go to trial. And I can't take someone's plea if they are not here, so do I have to compel him by force? And Daniel Diaz assured Judge Pullen that Rossi will appear in court next time, which is a lot like promising the judge that Lucy will definitely let Charlie Brown kick that football if just given one more chance. The next hearing, and now ultimate deadline, is set for January 7th at 1 p.m. Will Rossi plead guilty and bring this saga to a close? Or will he be taking his chances with a jury of his peers? We will find out very soon. Stay tuned. Nicholas Rossi update! And this is the one we have all been waiting for. We were back in Judge Pullen's Utah County courtroom for the final deadline, where Rossi had to either accept the plea deal offered to him or insist on going to trial by jury. And Rossi did appear on camera today because the judge required him to by force if necessary. And after months of the plea deal being on the table, with both defense and prosecutors saying, "Give us more time, Your Honor, we're really close to something," what was the answer?
My understanding is that there were ongoing settlement discussions. Have those been fruitful, or do you need the trial date?
Your Honor, they unfortunately haven't been fruitful.
That is right, Rossi has rejected the plea deal, so we are going to trial now in both Salt Lake County and Utah County. Because remember, this plea deal was going to resolve both of those charges, but that is now out the window forever, because prosecutor Stephen Jones has said the deals are off the table and will not be offered again. So the trial here with Judge Pullen won't be until September, but the trial with Judge Lawrence in Salt Lake County is in April, right around the corner. But before that, there is still going to be a lot of action. The defense wants some witnesses and evidence excluded, and the prosecution has filed 404B motions, which basically ask the judge, hey, Rossi has done a bunch of nasty stuff that he hasn't been charged with, but is related to his crime here. How much of that are we allowed to tell the jury? Because we'd like to tell them all of it. And Judge Pullen has demanded that Rossi appear in person in the court from here on out. Side note, according to Rossi's defense attorney, Daniel Diaz, the reason Rossi has been a no-show so far in court is out of concerns for reporters watching the hearing. Wonder who he's talking about. The next hearing is February 21 in front of Judge Lawrence, and then March 11th in front of Judge Pullen. I'll also be doing more updates between now and February with in-depth details about each of those cases and my thoughts on if he will be convicted or not. So there will be lots more Nicholas Rossi updates to come all year long. Stay tuned. Nicholas Rossi update! And the big news is, you guys broke the Utah court system. Like, for real. But we began with Rossi back in Judge Pullen's courtroom, where the first order of business was for the judge to ask, we still agree you're Nicholas Rossi, right? And Rossi's public defender, Samantha Dugan, said yes, but he'd still like to be called Knight or Knight Oliverdian, Your Honor. Jesus Christ. Okay, moving on. Now, court was supposed to meet 2 weeks ago, but it was postponed at the last minute because opposing counsel was still trying to work out some significant details, like what witnesses would testify and which of Rossi or Knight Oliverdian's past misdeeds would be included at trial. And Judge Lawrence said, the trial is supposed to be next month. Where the hell are we on this? And the prosecutor went, a little behind, Your Honor. So we're asking for a continuance until May, also because the key witness isn't available in April at all. Samantha Dugan objected to the date change because I guess felonies are like speeding tickets, and if the cop doesn't show up for court, then you win by default. And Judge Lawrence said, obviously a trial in April ain't gonna happen, but we're also not gonna kick this thing down the road indefinitely, so open up your calendars and let's figure this out. And if you've ever been in a group chat with more than 4 people trying to organize dinner plans, that's what the next 5 minutes of court was like. Oh, that date doesn't work with me. I've got a murder trial that day. But eventually they landed on May 19th as the new trial date and April 16th as that big witness and evidence hearing. And that is when Judge Lawrence looked at the camera and addressed all of us out here in the World Wide Web. I know there's members of the media watching, and this case has gotten a little bit of a following, and I hear some people have even started live streaming the hearings. Because of the sensitive nature of the things we're going to talk about, April 16th will be a closed court. There will be no video. And from now on, there will be no live stream of the videos. There will be one designated pool reporter, and all the other media outlets, MSNBC, CNN, the BBC, will need to request the video from that one person. So, round of applause, you guys have made it so that the biggest media companies in the world have to ask one local Utah reporter for footage. And just for the record, I have never live-streamed any of Judge Lawrence's hearings. I did do Judge Pullen that one time, but that was the plea deal verdict. That could have been the series finale. You would forgive me for that. Also, I've never recorded a single hearing because I respect the court. Instead, I just copy my footage from YouTube because someone else has done the editing for me, and I'm lazy. But May 19th is the new trial date for Rossi, or Knight Oliverian, or whatever he wants to be called now, and he will be back in front of Judge Pullen even before that, and of course, I will be bringing you all of those updates, even if there are a few extra hurdles now, as soon as they happen. Stay tuned. Nicholas Rossi update! Rossi was back in Judge Pullen's courtroom this time for a big motions hearing on which of his past misdeeds could be brought up at trial as evidence of his character. Rossi's court-appointed public defender, Daniel Diaz, asked for a continuance, i.e., could we reschedule today? Because the prosecution told us everything they wanted to include, and we filed an objection to that, and then they filed a brief in response to our objection, and I did not see it at all. I spaced. I did not get it until yesterday, and it was like 100 files, so we are totally not prepared for today, Your Honor. Fingers crossed they're just as prepared when we get to the actual trial. Diaz then said, hey, Judge Lawrence in that other trial is gonna make the hearing a closed session. Could we have that too? Because this is a big case, and we don't want to taint the jury pool. The state prosecutors then stood up and said, while we don't have any objection to the continuance request, closing the court, though, when this dude has been all over the news, all over the world for the last 3 years? Nah. If the jury has heard about the case, the jury has heard about the case. Tough titties, Rossi. Judge Pullen said, look, there's privacy, there's due process, and then there's the public interest, and I need to balance all three of those. So, Rossi's defense team, file a brief by April 8th explaining your arguments, and I will decide whether to close the court or not at that next hearing. But because Judge Pullen is presiding over a Moida trial in April, the next hearing Rossi has in front of Judge Pullen won't be until June. But because his trial in front of Judge Pullen isn't scheduled until September, it shouldn't delay anything. But don't fret, because Rossi was already going to have his hands full this summer with his other trial in front of Judge Lawrence, which goes down in May over in Salt Lake County. And the next time he sees Judge Pullen, he may very well already be a convicted felon. And of course, I will be bringing you all of those updates as soon as they happen. Stay tuned. Nicholas Rossi update! Rossi is headed back to Judge Lawrence's Salt Lake County Court this week for a 404B hearing where we're going to find out which of Rossi's past misdeeds can be used against him as evidence of his character. And we now know everything the prosecution is asking the judge for, and it's a lot. It includes calling as many as 7 other women who Rossi has been accused of assaulting, one of which is the woman in Rossi's other grape trial in front of Judge Pullen in Utah County. Also, the prosecution has to ask permission to tell the jury that there is a second grape trial. That is not automatically conferred knowledge. Prosecutors also hope to call a third Utah woman who went to the police back in 2007 who said Rossi did grape on her, but he was never charged there. They also want to call 2 women he essayed in Ohio in 2008, one of which resulted in the conviction that got him put on the National Offender Database. Then there's the 3 women he essayed in Rhode Island in 2010, one of which was his first wife, and also Rossi's plea of no contest to the DV charges she filed against him 1 week into their marriage. In addition to all of that, they want to submit evidence of his manipulations and abuse against the victim here in Salt Lake County in their relationship leading up to the assault. Also, eviction notices and accusations of fraud against Rossi, evidence that he faked his own death and fled the country, and of course, denying that he was Nicholas Rossi at all and claiming to be an Irish orphan named Arthur Knight, all while he fought his extradition from Scotland. Obviously, the defense wants none of that admitted and have countered that he faked his death before the charges were filed and he had a legal right to challenge his extradition. And as for all the women, well, let's just say the defense is in for an uphill battle. Now, there is going to be a lot of really sensitive stuff discussed at this hearing, so it is going to be a closed session, but we will find out shortly afterwards what will be let in as evidence and what Rossi is going to be able to duck out for, all in preparation for trial next month with Judge Lawrence. And then we're going to be doing all of this all over again in the summer for his second trial in front of Judge Pullen. And of course, I am going to be bringing you all of the Nicholas Rossi updates as soon as they happen. Stay tuned. Nicholas Rossi update! And this week, his long-awaited criminal trial is officially postponed. Yeah, I know. Rossi was originally supposed to go on trial in front of Judge Lawrence in April, but because of delays got bumped to this week. However, it quickly became clear to the judge that however much time he'd originally budgeted was still not going to be enough. They only scheduled one day of 404B hearings to decide which of Rossi's past misdeeds could be used as evidence against him. And they couldn't get it all done in one day. And you can't just say, well, let's pick this up tomorrow, because there is a whole county full of other cases already scheduled. One day of jury selection was also not going to be sufficient, and by the time they figured out all of the rescheduling, it's been decided that August will now be when Rossi's first criminal trial will start, and it's budgeted for 7 days. Meanwhile, over in Rossi's other criminal trial in front of Judge Pullen, it's been agreed that the evidence hearing scheduled for June 23rd will also be closed to the public, so as to not prejudice the jury pool, and also to protect the privacy of some of Rossi's victims in case their witness testimony winds up not being admitted. But I know what your big question really is. Is he still denying that he is Nicholas Rossi? And the answer is, kind of. You see, Rossi asked Judge Pullen to officially change the name of the case from Utah versus Nicholas Rossi to Utah versus Nicholas Oliverdian. He says that Rossi is just his adopted name, and he wants to distance himself from it. Geez, wonder why. And that Oliverdian is his actual birth name, and he changed it back in 2012 to reconnect with his heritage. Something that the court did not know when they filed this case. And can you blame the court for not knowing? This dude has used so many different names, it's impossible to keep track. Nicholas Oliverdian, Nicholas Rossi, Nicholas Brown, Arthur Knight Brown, and Timothy Arthur Nicholas Knight Brown, just to name a few. But now Rossi says he wants to be referred to only by his legal birth name of Oliverdian, as Rossi causes him distress because he claims that Utah jail officers are using it in a mocking manner and won't stop without the case name being changed to Oliverdian. Judge Pullen said there's been enough confusion with name changes already, so we're good. But they will refer to him as Nicholas Rossi, aka Nicholas Oliverdian, in that second trial, which is scheduled for 12 days in September. And obviously, I will bring you every Nicholas Rossi, aka Nicholas Oliverdian update as soon as they happen. Stay tuned. Nicholas Rossi update! And the day we have all been waiting for is finally here, because the long-awaited criminal trial of the man best known as Arthur Knight has officially begun. 4 years after his arrest in Scotland and nearly 2 decades since the alleged crime took place, Nicholas Rossi will now face a jury of his peers in a Utah courtroom. Everything kicks off this week with 2 full days of jury selection, and it's been reported that as many as 150 potential jurors will be interviewed in the hopes of finding just 12 who have never heard about this case. And I imagine the jury questionnaire will be, do you have TikTok? You do? Yeah, we're gonna excuse this juror, Your Honor. Next! After a jury is seated, though, arguments are scheduled to run for 5 days, beginning on August 11th and ending on August 15th, though that could be faster depending on how quickly they get through witnesses, or longer if Rossi takes the stand in his own defense. Because even a simple question like, state your name for the jury, please, could take half a day given how many aliases this guy has used. And if you think this is all finally coming to an end, oh no. Because remember, this is just the first of 2 criminal trials Rossi is facing just this year. His other criminal trial in Utah starts in September. And then there are all the other states and countries where he has also been accused of crimes but has not been indicted yet, and all of that could be coming in short order. I, of course, will be doing daily trial updates right here on this app, and I'll post another update before then, bringing you up to speed on all the details of this particular case in preparation for the trial. So follow along if you want to stay in the loop. Lots more updates to come. Stay tuned. Nicholas Rossi update! And this is everything you need to know about the crime he's on trial for. Now that the jury has been seated and given instructions not to watch the news, you and I can get into all the details. Rossi is accused of first-degree of a woman in Salt Lake County in late 2008. We only know the victim by the initials MS. She was 26 years old at the time and Rossi's girlfriend, but that doesn't mean a whole lot. You see, Rossi's MO was to meet women online, get into whirlwind romances with them, and then start bleeding them for money and abusing them. And that's what happened here. They'd only been dating less than a month and were already engaged and shopping for wedding rings. Also, Rossi was unemployed and borrowing money from her he had no intention of paying back. And already, the emotional and verbal abuse was starting to seep in. That all culminated in a violent argument at a Utah shopping mall when they were picking up their engagement rings. MS pretty much called off the engagement then and there and drove Rossi back to his apartment. But he wouldn't get out of the car and threatened to call the cops on her, saying that she had hit him unless she came inside. She relented, and once inside his apartment, Rossi locked the doors on her, and that's when the assault happened, according to the charging documents. Now, MS did not go to the police at the time, so no kit was done, and she didn't come forward until 2022 after Rossi did that crazy interview on Dateline and became an international news story. Now, fortunately for MS, this isn't a case of he said, she said, as there are other corroborating accounts. Rossi was convicted of sexual assault in Ohio in 2008, so he's known to the court as a registered sex offender. He's also been indicted in Utah County for another count of against another woman, and he will be facing trial over that in September. And in that Utah County case, the woman did go to the police immediately after the assault happened, and a kit was performed, so there is DNA evidence tying Rossi to the crime. Prosecutors plan on calling both of these women to testify in both cases, so hopefully that will establish a pattern of behavior to the jury. Rossi has further been accused of assault by many other women across 4 U.S. states and even in the UK. But as he hasn't been formally charged with a crime in any of those instances, it's uncertain if any of that will be admissible as evidence, or what other things Rossi has done that the jury might be informed of, like faking his own death, fleeing the country, the whole Arthur Knight facade, and a lot of other things. But we should be finding out about all of that on the first day of trial. Trial is going to last 5 days in front of Judge Lawrence, and even though Rossi has a couple $100,000 in stolen money squirreled away somewhere, he's going to be represented by a public defender paid for by the state of Utah. If Rossi is convicted, he's looking at a minimum of 5 years and a maximum of life in prison. But because he's already spent 3 years in jail awaiting trial, that would count as time served for some of it. The jury will have 8 people on it. Apparently Utah only does 12 jurors in capital murder cases, but they do need to be unanimous to convict. But even if Rossi does walk on these charges, it's not over for him, not by a long shot, because he's still facing a trial in Utah County in September, and the evidence there is a lot stronger. But his trial in Salt Lake County kicks off on Monday, and I will be bringing you daily news updates as they happen. And of course, I will be wearing my old-timey newsman hat for that. Stay tuned.